I would say the defining feature of politics in Britain and actually globally is anti-establishment. People are sick of the status quo. They're sick of the mainstream media, what's taking place on their screens, and the cost of living crisis going up, inflation, climate chaos. All of this is on the minds of people because there is a connection, I would say, with what is happening in Palestine and the whole Palestinian movement growing, and the general anger in society and the general anger in Britain.
Welcome to the Big Picture podcast. My name is Mohammed Hassan, and today we sit down with Fiona Lali, activist, organiser, and independent candidate in the upcoming UK general election. Lali went viral in May when she confronted former British Home Secretary Suella Braverman on live television, in what many saw as a powerful rebuttal of Braverman's views on the university encampments protesting for Gaza.
I really want to say that I think it's great, actually, that you went to that camp today and tried to talk to those students, and you kind of embarrassed yourself, I would say, whilst doing that, because it was a reminder for me, and I'm sure for other people watching, that actually the Palestine movement brought you down, and the Palestine movement has the potential to bring down lots of other Tory ministers and the whole Tory government, and not just the Tory government, I would say any government and any mainstream political party that is backing what Israel is doing right now, which is a genocide.
Lali is a campaign coordinator for the Revolutionary Communist Party and is now standing as a candidate for Stratford and Bow here in London. So how did she feel confronting one of the most high-profile and divisive political figures in the UK? And what would she like to change about the country now that she's entered into politics? Fiona Lali, welcome to The Big Picture. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much.
I want to talk to you about the Palestine movement. I want to talk to you about your campaign for independent seat for Stratford and Bow in the upcoming elections. I want to talk to you about your media appearances, your confrontation with some of the most divisive political figures that we have in this country. You got a lot of attention over the last couple of weeks because of your media appearance on GB News, talking to Suella Braverman. I'm sure you're sick to death of talking about that interview by now. Or maybe you're relishing in it, maybe. But I want to ask you why you chose to go on. Did you know that you were going to be talking to Suella? What was that kind of decision like for you?
Yeah. Well, part of the reason why I chose to do it was because it was Suella Braverman. She obviously represents the kind of the most extreme elements of the Tory party today, and she was the Home Secretary, and she was very involved in trying to clamp down on the Palestine movement, describing the protests as hate marches, trying to get the police to be even more repressive than they already are, and the significance of the fact that she was brought down in effect by the Palestine movement. It was her confrontation over that question that forced her out of her position as the Home Secretary. And so it felt like an opportunity to confront her in the way that I think a lot of people would like to, which is to just expose the lies, the hypocrisy, and also give light to the fact that people no longer are sort of cowed by these smears and attacks that people like Suella and loads of other politicians use to try and hide people from speaking out about Palestine. They try and scare people that if you come forward, things are going to go really terribly for you. But actually, the reason I went on was to tell the truth and also to hopefully give confidence to the movement, which is growing and has a lot of support, and to try and take that further.
Now, Braverman had just a couple of days earlier visited the student encampment in Cambridge, and there was a very comical clip of her trying to speak to anybody in the encampment, and people and the students that were there refused to.
Hi, I'm Suella. I'm keen to find out your views and what you're protesting about.
Nothing at all.
When you went on, what did you decide that you wanted to focus on, and what message were you intending to get across?
I think she was aiming to have a sort of patronising exchange with me and also with the students in Cambridge to try and catch them out, try and make them look silly, and, you know, suggest, oh, you're not really interested in debate or something like this. And so what I was trying to do was expose the complete cynicism of that from her point of view. And actually, one of the moments in the interview where I felt she was the most kind of put off was when I said, you're only doing this because you want to be the leader of the Tory party, to show that these people, and particularly Suella, I mean, all she's interested in is herself and her career, and she'll sacrifice anything and say anything to get there, including this demonisation of the protesters and by extension, obviously, the Palestinians. And so I wanted to defend the student protesters and their decision to not engage with her and not give her the cheap kind of media clip that she wanted, and hopefully, make her look like a bit of an idiot, which I think that's why people have enjoyed the interviews, because she kind of stuttered a bit and wasn't able to really respond. But just this is what everyone thinks of, and it's not just about Suella, right? It's about what she represents, the Tories parties, and I would say but also the Labour Party now as well. None of these people represent the genuine interests or desires of students or workers in Britain today, and they don't have the right to claim that they do so. All the polls show that the majority of people in Britain don't support what's happening in Gaza and don't support the British government's support for it, and so we've got to, and the media doesn't say that, at least the mainstream media in Britain. There's no voice for that opinion, and so that was the goal, really, was to provide that, and GB News let me do it, so that was a bit of a surprise as well.
And Braverman is one of many voices. I think she's certainly been the loudest of mainstream voices that have tried to turn the Palestine protest movement into a source of contention, into somewhat of a threat to social order, and Braverman herself has been accused, maybe, you know, even from some people in her own party, of trying to spark a sort of culture war around this protest movement. Do you think she was successful in doing that?
No, not in this particular moment. I actually think everything that she does and any of these politicians do to try and create hysteria over the question of should people be allowed to protest, are these people safe, are they actually really violent, has the opposite effect now, and enrages people to the degree that they think, well, I'm going to make these protests even bigger. I want to do more for this movement. And I think it's because, one, they've lied so much over the question of Palestine, but they lie on everything else. Sometimes people, and sometimes in the media, they say, oh, aren't these politicians stoking up hate? They're using divisive language. And it's true, Suella Braverman, they use a lot of divisive language, but I would say it's not just language, it's also concretely policy. The media sometimes present it as this battle of bad words and slogans, and that's at the root of the problem. But it isn't just, language is just an expression of something really happening, which is they are actively trying to deport people, or they are actively engaged in a war or a genocide that is taking place. And it's important also to move the conversation away from language to what do you actually do and what do you concretely support.
You were also invited to On Talk TV not too long ago, and that was an even more comical exchange between you and the two hosts that you were speaking to. Why do you think you got invited onto that platform after the Braverman interview?
I think they wanted another opportunity to try and shut down, just a pro-Palestinian voice. And I'll admit, I'd only seen a few clips of the show before I went on. So when I got there, I thought, oh, right, okay, this is a bit strange. But it became very clear to me, and the reason I did it, because this is important, people ask me, why would you go on a show like that as well? I wasn't trying to convince James Whale. I don't even remember the name of the guy sat next to him. I wasn't trying to convince them, but I recognize that what I'm doing is I'm trying to speak to a broader cause that is taking place. And also from my political perspective, I want to connect, because there is a connection, I would say, with what is happening in Palestine and the whole Palestinian movement growing, and the general anger in society and the general anger in Britain. I would say the defining feature of politics in Britain and actually globally is anti-establishment. People are sick of the status quo. They're sick of the mainstream media, what's taking place on their screens, and the cost of living crisis going up, inflation, climate chaos. All of this is on the minds of people. And then, you've got these clowns like James Whale. I can't even remember all the different things he said or even accused me of. But I wanted to show, and I want to be a platform for the real mood and the real interests that people have. And I will take, within reason, any opportunity I can to demonstrate that. And also, I would say, to show people that it's not just about being an individual. I'm obviously a part of an organisation as well. And I think that's very important, is this isn't a movement about individuals, but people need to kind of move beyond that and look to being organised as a force, because organisation has much more impact than any one individual can have.
And you talked about language and the use and the extent of what language can achieve. And I think Talk TV in particular, but also the Piers Morgan show, have become these spaces where, especially over the last 8 months, there's so much debate and there's so much anger and shouting and people antagonizing each other. And oftentimes it ends up being sort of this circular conversation where if you watch a Piers Morgan interview today, he kind of sounds like he did 8 months ago. It doesn't really seem like anybody in that program has necessarily learned anything from all of these conversations. So how do you see what's happening in the media in terms of these conversations and these debates versus what's happening on the streets and some of the organizing that you've been a part of?
I think that, the first thing I did after the Suella Braverman interview was gaining a bit of traction was we called a meeting for a national meeting for all of the encampments and any supporters of the encampments to try and plan how can we ensure that the movement doesn't just fizzle out. Summer is coming up, the university terms are ending, and what we wanted to talk about was how do we reignite this in the freshers period and maintain the support that's already been developed. So the point again of the media interviews is to then, and that gained, we got more people to that meeting than we would have had that interview not taken place. I think anything that is done, and anyone that goes in the media needs to then connect that with some real life organising. And I would say that like earlier with Suella Braverman, when they do these things, and Piers Morgan now is changing his tune and is trying to claim a bit of Israel's gone too far, but it doesn't mean anything to people because
he might change his tune again next week.
Exactly,
you never know.
It's very shallow. It's very superficial, and people can see that these figures aren't the be all end all of the movement, but they obviously have an impact. But their impact is one of we need to do more to expose these people for what they're doing. I think Piers Morgan, anyone in the media who's attacking either the Palestinian movement or not saying the truth of what is happening, just shows people that the whole establishment, the whole status quo is not really geared towards truth at all. And I think it hopefully in a kind of backwards twisted way gives confidence to people in the need to have our own press actually and our own spaces to organise, to take things forward and not rely on these kind of institutions or figures of any kind.
Tell me what it's been like taking part in these encampments and you talked about having nationwide meetings. How does that information get passed between these different encampments? How do they talk to each other? Is there sort of overarching plan about what to do when, how to protect the students from being persecuted either by their universities or by police?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, right now, truthfully, there isn't one national organising force for all of the encampments. Ultimately, I think that's what we need to move towards. The organisation I'm a part of, the Revolutionary Communist Party, has been involved in setting up encampments in different places, but there isn't one clear force, which I think is a weakness of the movement at the moment. And I think if we are to reignite it in the way that's necessary, that's what I want to organise for and fight for. And it's different in slightly different places as a result of that. Of course, organically, when things like this happen, people share resources and they share information. And there has been discussion amongst students in different places. I mean, this whole thing started in America, right? The reason these encampments are taking place is because people were inspired by what the American students began. They started in Britain. I think there was encampments as far as Japan and Australia and all over the world, which also shows the international aspect of this whole movement. And what I would argue is that is its main strength, the fact that there is so many people out there looking for support or wanting to support it. The best encampments, or the largest ones, are ones where the local community and the town are actively involved. And this is the other thing that's important from my perspective, is the need to grow the encampments beyond the students into wider layers of society and ultimately into the workers and into the working class as a whole. Because if it was to mobilise on that basis, then I think much more could be done to actively halt the war machine, to actively stop money, the flow of money, and also the flow of weapons from actually going to Israel. That's obviously what the encampments are about. If there's a group of 15 students at a university, the university management are going to just ignore them for as long as they can. We've got to be realistic about that. But if you grow that and you get hundreds of students, and then you've got all the workers in the town supporting that, and also seeking to take action on their own terms, that becomes a force that cannot be ignored. And that is the perspective that I want to raise, and what I would argue for in all of these different encampments. But there are different ideas out there, even within the encampments, on what is the best strategy and how to take things forward. And these need to be discussed out and debated and then clarified, and we need to take the next steps.
Where would you hope for this movement to go if it spills over into the next semester?
I think any movement, and if it becomes a mass movement, in and of itself has the potential to move in a revolutionary direction. I would say that today Palestine has become a lightning rod of all the accumulated anger in society, because the same people who are supporting what Israel is doing are the same people who are cutting the NHS. They're the same people cutting the education sector, and all of that kind of can converge together. And so that's what I said to Suella Braverman, is that this movement could bring down the whole of the Tory government. Okay, now we've got a general election, so that's
they might bring themselves down.
Yeah, they might bring themselves down. So what I hope is that if the student encampments can grow and spread to different layers of society, and we can connect on a firm political basis how their funding for Israel, all of the money that they send to Israel, they don't put into the NHS, they don't put into housing, they don't put into education. It makes it relevant to everyone's lives, and that's a real thing. It's not a fake thing at all. That is what I hope will happen, and it's on that basis that you can actually change things. I mean, I want to completely transform the whole way in which society is organised and set up. The desire for economy that is run on the basis of profit and not need is also what's at the root of this. That's why they find money for bombs, and because they're trying to, maintain their imperialist interests in the region. They can fund that, but not fund things that we actually need, because that doesn't give them profit. That is what I'm also trying to fight. And I think when you explain it in that way, you can connect with many more people, which is what I hope the movement grows to do.
I want to ask you to tell me more about that, because that's an issue that you tried to raise during that interview, and I think you got ridiculed and attacked quite viciously for.
Yeah.
And of course, you yourself are a Marxist. This is the basis of how you see the world and how you see society, and what your politics is. So I want to ask you to explain how you see the link between the student movement, the these young people that are being really engaged and radicalized by what's happening in Palestine and the workers' movement in this country?
Yeah, I think if we look at the general election, or if we look at society from the perspective of someone who's 18, they have probably been in school where they've had a couple of years in the pandemic. The climate strike movement happened only a couple of years ago. You're 18, it's the first time your school's got asbestos in the walls, the NHS is falling apart, and you've got the opportunity to vote for the first time, and your choices are Rishi Sunak, who's just announced that he wants to implement national service, and Keir Starmer, who has promised that a Labour government will be a government of austerity, essentially, and that tough decisions are going to need to be taken. We know what that means. That is not a choice at all. And I think people can see that this idea that might have existed in the past, that you can grow up, go to uni, get a good job, buy a house, have a family, that's just not a reality for anyone anymore. Young people's futures are at stake in general, and I think they're angry at the choice that they're being faced with, and then they see the absolute horrors that are taking place in Palestine, and we can see it on social media, we can see what is taking place, and then they're watching politicians come out in chorus, Israel has the right to defend itself, and we need to send this money, and all this kind of stuff. The British state historically is responsible for the crimes that are taking place in Palestine today, and the truth of that history is being exposed in a distorted way, but people are starting to see that. And I think that the main mood is anger. There will be apathy in the election. I think lots of people won't turn out to vote, because why would they? But what I want to do, and I think what needs to happen, is show people that anger can be channeled into something, into a real political force, and that is the way to take things forward, and that there's an alternative to this system. There's an alternative to a society, that is run on the base of profit. We don't have to live like this. We have all of the resources in society to feed everyone, to house everyone, to clothe everyone. But those resources are privately held. And so what I stand for is to take that wealth that already exists in society and use it for what we actually need. And that's what I want to connect with, because I think that mood is out there, and Marxists didn't create that mood. Capitalism created that mood itself. Those events took place, and now I want to connect with it in a meaningful way, I would say.
And so tell me then why you decided to enter into the political arena yourself, and put yourself forward as a candidate.
I want to represent the genuine interests and needs of workers and young people. And I want to show, and I want to use a platform to help build a movement, not just in Parliament, because, I'll be completely honest, I have no illusions that one MP can take on the entire political establishment, and one MP out of 650 or whatever it is can transform everything by themselves as an individual. What you have to do is use your platform to help organise people outside of Parliament as well. And there's other examples of this. I think Corbyn, although the analogy can only go so far because he was the leader of a big political party, but Corbyn was at his best, I would say, not in Parliament, but it was what he was able to mobilise outside of Parliament. Hundreds of thousands of people who were awoken to the idea also of socialism, which is what he was, putting forward in his own way, though I would have differences in terms of what that actually meant. It was what he was able to do outside in mobilising a whole generation, actually, of people who wanted to do something. And so what I want to do is run a very effective campaign, exposing war criminals, exposing the whole political establishment for their crimes in Palestine, but also their crimes in Britain in implementing austerity. And I believe if you run on that basis and explain that the end goal here isn't just to be an MP, but is to create a platform and help build a movement that can actually attack the political establishment in other forms. For example, like I was saying earlier about strike action, Corbyn would spend a lot of, go and visit the picket lines, go and help convince workers of the power that they actually have. The whole of this, the last 8 months has shown the limit of just appealing to politicians and appealing to parliaments to stop what's happening. But what they can't ignore is if workers go on strike. And what I want to do is use a platform to encourage that and help organise that sort of political action.
And Jeremy Corbyn is somebody that is, institutionally comes from a section of the Labour Party that has grown out of the workers' movements and unions, and that now you looking back at his career and where he's ended up as an independent candidate, challenging Labour, the party that he spent his entire career in. Where do you see Labour as a party in representing the rights of workers and the rights of unions in the way that it prides itself as having done in the past?
Yeah, well, today they don't represent workers at all. I mean, Keir Starmer has made it very clear, and Rachel Reeves, that they want to be, or they will be the most pro-business Labour government that there has been. Historically, of course, the Labour Party was set up to represent the interests of the working class in Britain, and it's gone through different formats in different times. And I mean, I was a member of the Labour Party, and I was expelled from the Labour Party after Keir Starmer became the leader. He expelled many socialists and left-wingers because they wanted to rid the party of that base that really existed. Which is fine. So clearly right now, the Labour Party is not a reference for working people or young people, and it won't be in government. I mean, that's the other thing, is what I'm interested in is not even just so much July the 4th, but July the 5th, which is what will be a right-wing Labour government in all likelihood in power, and how we fight that. And that's when the question of the unions is very important, because I think for a long time the unions in Britain were supporting Corbyn and waiting for him to get into power, and then there was this idea that Corbyn will repeal the anti-trade union laws and everything will be fine. That hasn't happened, which means that actual action needs to take place. In a lot of the Palestine protests, you get a lot of union flags and delegations from the unions, which is very good. But I would say the union leaders could do much, much more to actually organise their members against the war machine, but also just in general against the Tory government and also a right-wing Labour government, and they mustn't not commit to that. There's going to be a lot of anger and there's going to be austerity. There'll be more attacks on people's living standards and working conditions. And what I would argue for is more militancy in the unions, because they have the power to change. I mean, in the 70s, the unions' mass strike action brought down a Tory government in Britain. That's the kind of approach that we need to have, whilst at the same time, I would say, organising an alternative, right? It's good to be against things, and there's a lot to be against in this society, but you've got to be for something as well, which is what I'm trying to organise on.
And we're here at the Queen Mary University encampment, where students are braving the rainy weather to continue to camp in their tents, calling for the university to divest from Israel. You've been to encampments in many different locations. What would you say the mood is in general? Are these protests growing in momentum, in size?
Yeah, it's a bit different in different places, if we're honest about it, but the overwhelming feeling is militancy against the university management. I mean, here at Queen Mary, the students are really angry because the response from management has been to just kind of laugh at the students, ignore them, even when they're getting attacked. Actually, at this encampment, 2 Zionist thugs showed up the other day to try and intimidate all of the students. But as we saw in America, when repression takes place towards the encampments, it makes people angrier because they begin to connect the dots, right? And that's what makes, I would say, the government so scared of this whole movement, is when people start to see that, you know, this university management is laughing in their faces, and then they're also cutting courses and they're also attacking staff, their working conditions, their pensions. All of this stuff is accumulating, and I would say more generally that is why right now Palestine has become the issue through which all anti-establishment politics is being kind of fractured through, right? That's why at Queen Mary and in other encampments, the wider community is doing so much to support them. And that's exactly the message that we want to get across, that workers should do more to join these encampments in universities, but also elsewhere. If we really want this movement to grow, it's got to go to as many workplaces as possible.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background, how you got involved in politics, how you got involved in organizing, and basically how you ended up where you are today?
I mean, I would say I would put myself as part of this generation sort of inspired by the Corbyn movement. And I remember when I was at university, Corbyn becoming leader of the Labour Party, and I joined, and I was very inspired and excited by that process and canvassed for him and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I would say myself and a lot of other people have become more and more open to more radical revolutionary ideas, and coming into contact with the ideas of Marxism was a big part of my political journey, and basically recognizing, I mean, I wanted to be a lawyer. I was going to be a human rights lawyer. That was the kind of thing I was interested in. And then it was actually looking at the complete vapid nature of international law in a lot of ways. I mean, we can also see that with the Palestine movement. There are endless motions, endless statements by international lawyers that what's taking place is wrong, is a crime, but they can't actually do anything. They're very, very limited. And so it was recognizing that there was something bigger at play here, and that actually the whole of the way in which capitalism is set up is not one where you can just tinker with the edges and hope that that's going to fundamentally change things. And so it was reading and studying theory, the theory and the ideas of Marxism, that pushed me in the direction. I came into contact with the organisation I'm a part of now, which is only founded actually a couple of weeks ago, refounded as the Revolutionary Communist Party.
What was it before?
We were called Socialist Appeal. We were just kind of tendency. And I met them when I was at university and joined the organisation. And it was on that basis that I learned a lot about, we have a big emphasis on studying the history of the class struggle, because, what's happening right now is not just a completely random event, I would say. And if you study the waves and patterns of the whole of human society, you see that revolutions and wars happen at certain moments and are flashpoints for what can then ultimately transform things. And so what I'm seeking to do, and learning more about that, is what led me to want to play a part in making sure that when these big transformative moments happen, and I think we are living through a transformative period, right? These aren't simple times. When you look back, when future historians look back at these years, I think they will say these were the most tumultuous years, where constant wars. I mean, revolutions. There was a revolution in Sudan a couple of years ago, mass movement in Sri Lanka. Like, all of this stuff is taking place. But when you study these moments, what you also see is that where there's no organisation, where there's no programme, it's like a wave. It comes up and then it crashes down, and nothing fundamentally changes. And so I realised, with the help of this organisation, that you must have a proper organised political force. Otherwise, it will dissipate. And that is why, I do what I do. It's to try and build a political force so that when these moments come about, we can put forward a programme that hopefully connects with the mood that exists in society, with an offer for what it should then become. And there's been lots of examples of that also. In 2011, huge revolutions across the Middle East, inspiring millions of people that did overthrow regimes. But then it kind of dissipates because there's no organised, I would say, revolutionary party prepared to put forward a programme that answers the contradictions. I think that's what we need to build in Britain, but also internationally. Otherwise, what we will see over the next 5 years is mass movements, anger, revolutions, but no fundamental change if there's no party that can actually bring that all together.
I mean, I think you're right that we are living through quite a turbulent moment, economically, socially, politically, and it's also a moment where there is a huge disenchantment with mainstream political systems and mainstream economic systems, and there's a lot of upheaval, and you can feel it in the society around you. We're also living in this country through a cost of living crisis, and so all of that is impacting people's lives, and the way that people react to it can often differ. You're seeing also across Europe and in the United States the rise of fascism and the rise of an appeal to fascism, and all the sense of authoritarianism as a way to kind of that makes people feel a sense of security in their lives, but that often ends up becoming extremely xenophobic and anti-immigrant, and you're seeing some of those elements here in the UK. How do you see, as an organizer, as somebody that wants to organize politically and create a structure around that, what does that look like? How do you give people alternatives to believe in a political system that they might feel like they don't have a part in?
Yeah, I think this is an important point, because clearly society is polarizing. On the one hand, there is a rise of left-wing ideas and people looking towards it, but we also have to be clear that it can move in different directions, and it can move to the right. And there are other figures and organizations who can capitalize on this anti-establishment mood. I mean, that's ultimately what Trump did, and that's how he won. He won on the basis of tapping in with complete disgust and anger with the status quo. The same with Bolsonaro in Brazil, and there's other figures like this. And so what's very important is that there's a principled organization with a clear, I would say, class-based program that connects with people. I think sometimes the left tries to respond to the horrible things that the right wing promote, racism, xenophobia, and they respond to it on a moral basis, which is I'm morally opposed to the capitalist system and the morality that it has produced, which justifies racism, murder, and all of these kind of things. But I think if you don't connect it with the class needs that people have, it can be twisted and distorted in different ways. And I think that has been the mistake of the left in different countries, is they've been unable to put forward a clear class-based program that answers all of the problems that people have, and they're trying to just tinker with the system and offer reforms. People don't want small reforms, they want something fundamentally different. And so what's necessary is for these clear ideas to be expressed, but also with a party and an organisation behind it, and in a way that also doesn't say, we'll do this for you. That's the other thing that's important. The reason why I think strike action is so important is because it shows people the role that they can play in their own lives. It raises consciousness and class consciousness, rather than, we just need to vote for one person and they can change everything for us. The message that I want to get out there is people have the power to change their lives themselves when they're working alongside others. And that is very important, and sometimes missing from what other left projects or kind of left parties might promote. What we're interested in is not the role of any individual, but the role of the collective. I mean, the working class internationally has the power to transform things, has the power to halt production. And when a strike takes place, or when a global strike, a general strike, when a general strike happens, those are so powerful because they pose the question of power very concretely in a country, and it brings everything to a standstill, and it shows people, we can, run things if we wanted to. That is what I'm interested in promoting, and that can only be done on the basis of mass organising and collective power, which is very important, and that is how I would say you win over those people in society who can be duped into what the right wing say, duped into the idea that it's migrants that are causing problems in their life. If you explain very clearly the cost of living crisis and the role that big business plays and the role that these politicians have, and that actually you have more to gain by joining up with these people, by working alongside them, and together collectively take ownership of your lives, but you will only convince people of that if you've got a serious political argument and you're also a serious force. It doesn't happen overnight. It requires work. But that's what I'm trying to do.
I think the point that you make about power is really salient, because I mean you just have to look at whenever there's a tube strike or an NHS strike in this country, everything comes to a standstill. And it's easy, I think, often for people to feel like they're powerless, and often people do feel powerless in a system when they feel like if they don't have political power or financial power, then they don't really have a voice in their societies. Yeah. How do you encourage people? How do you convince them otherwise? It's a pretty potent idea that can grab a hold of people or entire societies.
Yeah, I think this is the central point, because I would say the main reason that we still live under capitalism, for example, isn't even the fact that the state, they've got the police, they've got the army, they've got all of these institutions. It's actually just that the idea that this is how life is, right? Most people in their day-to-day lives aren't questioning the fundamental structure of society. They go to work, they go home, they feed their kids, and that's it. But at certain moments that can fracture, and that will be because of events taking place that have pushed people to go on strike. A movement is starting to develop. I don't think you can declare that from the sidelines. I don't think I can shout on a megaphone and say, think differently about your lives. What I think you can do is when people organically, on the basis of their own needs, it's like a spring, right? If you push people down enough, eventually they're forced to fight back, and they will do so, and strikes can and will happen. If in that moment there's enough of a political force that can then connect it with the other things that are taking place and say, yes, and what about this? Yes, and shouldn't we always run society? Why shouldn't, who knows best about how the train should be run? It's not the operators at the top, it's not the business owners, it's the drivers themselves, it's the passengers who are on it. But you've got to be prepared for those moments and then intervene on that basis. I think that is the most important thing, and I think that is the type of moment we're moving towards in general globally. It's a fundamental questioning of the system. It's going to express itself in different ways, and I don't think it's a linear process. It can go up and down. There can be sharp moves to the left and then sharp moves to the right. But if during all of that time we're continuing to build this political force, then I think as these events take place, eventually you'll have a group with enough roots in the working class to intervene at the right moment to take it to the next level. That is what's important. It's a question of consciousness at the end of the day. Because once people believe that they can change society, I think there's no force on earth that could stop them.
You said that the Palestinian movement has become this lightning rod for young people, for workers. What do you think has been the aspect of that, of what's happening in Gaza, of what people have been seeing on their screens, that has galvanized people in that way? Why have people connected to what's happening in such a visceral way that has pushed them? People have been protesting in this country for 8 months straight. It's almost it's hard to imagine that this kind of movement would grow from something that is happening in a place that many people aren't necessarily naturally connected to.
I think it's partly the hypocrisy of the last couple of years with the war in Ukraine. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the British media and the British political establishment, I should say, poured a lot of energy into condemning what Russia was doing, condemning war crimes, and then bringing in Ukrainian refugees and saying we should fund this. And a lot was poured into that. And to so very quickly have such a stark kind of confrontation of that in the face of, okay, another war that is taking place with horrors that are much more, that we don't need cheap comparisons, but very, very extreme what is happening in Gaza, and the complete just falsifying nature of how the government has tried to say, no, but they're not entitled to, as in the Palestinians are not entitled to claiming asylum or claiming a refugee program. And actually their fight for self-defense or a homeland is somehow wrong or unjustified or anything like this. I think, unfortunately, for the British government, it's too close together. And it's also, related to the general problems that people are already facing in Britain themselves. They're angry at the government, they're angry at austerity. A lot of sympathy was whipped up for the Ukrainians, rightly so. Ukrainians are obviously suffering. But you can't do that and then say, oh, but not them, on the question of Palestinians. So I think this thing about hypocrisy is a big part of it, and just the nature of war. I think people are, in general, there's a lot of polls that show people are increasingly dissatisfied with capitalism as a whole as well. And I think it's become quite clear in the case of Palestine that it really is a question of land and resources and the drive to acquire more and more of that. And so there's a whole generation of people growing up seeing that, and they're disgusted by it. And the propaganda that used to be promoted. Look, there's been other wars and other like bombings that Britain has been involved in. They've done this before. They did Afghanistan, Iraq and Syria and Libya. They've done this many, many times. But the difference now in comparison to times before is there's already anger and mistrust and the desire for something different. And so to do something so extreme whilst the mood is already like that, I think it means that it's done for them. You know, people don't believe them and they can't justify it.
Do you think there's a generational shift in how young people are seeing themselves and their place in the world?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's linked to the fact that young people can't see how am I going to buy a house? How am I going to have kids? I mean, you know, there's so many people who aren't having children because they think I can't afford to do so. I can't pay my rent. I see no real stability in my life. And their parents but definitely their grandparents did have that to a certain degree. Obviously, there's always been poverty and there's always been difficulty. But even now, I mean, life expectancy is declining in certain areas of the UK. I mean, that is really extreme. And so there is a generational shift on that basis. Young people today have no memories of a time when capitalism was good for them. I think that's quite significant as well. If you were 18, I mean, the 2008 financial crash happened when you were I don't know, quite young. My maths is not very good, I've forgotten. But you're very, very young when the 2008 financial crash happened, right? So your whole experience of life has just been austerity, the banks collapsing, climate chaos. Why would you think that this society had something to offer you? I think that is really significant. There was a poll that showed the kids' words of the year. I don't know how they measure this, but the top kids' words of the year last year was war and climate change.
Wow.
And so I think there's a whole generation of people who are thinking this whole world is falling apart. And for a certain layer, not all of them, but a certain layer, they're now thinking, I'm going to do everything I can to fight to change it. And I think they can. I think they will. And I think in my lifetime, we will see more revolutions, not just in other far-off countries, but also in this country and even in America. And there's a lot of polls there that also show complete disgust with Biden and Trump. And I mean, America's the belly of the beast when it comes to propaganda about Israel. And yet the polls now are showing young people can see through all of that. So they're losing the political narrative, they're losing the propaganda battle. And as I said earlier, that's that faith that the government is there to protect us, or the police are there to protect us. That lesson has been very sharply learned through the Black Lives Matter movement, through how they responded to the encampments, and future protests that are sure to take place. The faith that people have in our fundamental institutions are being completely shaken, especially from young people, which makes things very, very worrying for the ruling class. But for the Marxists or the communists, this is very good.
You guys are lying in wait.
Yeah. We can connect with that, and we can because it's true. And what I want to say is that it's not enough just to hate it. It's not enough just to recognize that it's a problem. Get stuck in with trying to change it, because you can. Yeah.
My final question to you: you're on the campaign trail right now. You're talking to
Yes.
people. You're door knocking. What is your sales pitch to people to kind of get them to come out and vote for you come July?
I would say that all of the money that is being used to fund fundamentally what Israel is doing, but not just Israel. I mean, in general, the way that the capitalism is set up and the way that the British state kind of organises itself, it's to invest in things that benefit a very small minority of people in society. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. I don't need to say that to people. People can see that, they feel that, they experience that every single day in their lives. And I want to connect what is taking place in Israel, because Palestine will dominate this general election. I'm sure of that, and people are very concerned about what's happening. And I want to expose the fact that they do that whilst at the same time implementing austerity. But it's a lie that austerity has to happen because we can't afford it. The money is there. We need to organise to take control of that money that actually we produce, workers produce. It's not bosses, it's not bankers who produce wealth in society. It's us, it's ordinary people in their day-to-day lives. And I want to say that I want to build a platform, not just to talk in Parliament, but to organise people in their workplaces and in their communities where they actually have power. And if you want to fundamentally help build something entirely opposed to what is currently on offer, then you should, support me and join the campaign.
Fiona Lali, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Big Picture, and a big thank you to our guest today, Fiona Lali. We want to know what you have to say about this episode, this conversation, the upcoming general elections in the UK, which we will continue to cover here on this podcast, and of course, the ongoing situation in Gaza. Let us know in the comments. As always, you can listen to all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts from, and until next time, salam.